There's no reason I'm supposed to be here. I was here to meet Amy, and, somebody could look at it and say how cruel that you survive all that and you meet the love of your life. Then she dies, but, God, I wouldn't change it for anything in the world. I didn't get to fly for the Marine Corps because I lost my eye. Well, if I'd flown for the Marine Corps, I might not have been in a plane with wind. Anybody else in there might not have been able to get down to him and, say our goodbyes. And, when I was there with him when he took his last breath, and he was my brother and I loved him and, still do. And I was there when my wife, took her last breath, and I'm grateful for that. I've always been a big Rocky fan, right? The underdog. I mean, I love what he said. It's not about how hard you can hit. It's about how hard you can get hit and keep moving forward. That's how you get through adversity. You've got to take the hits. I think each thing that's happened to me has prepared me for the next. I think when Dr. Roberts said, I hope you find God's purpose for you, and myself, I firmly believe this. I think it was to help Amy through her own life and death battle and help her get to make it to the finish line. And, I think now she's helping me make it to my finish line.
Hey everyone, this is Rod Cate, and welcome to episode 12 of Rocket Motivation. Today's guest is someone who has dealt with multiple adversities, devastating physical injuries, as well as emotional loss. He lost an eye in a bar fight. He lost his best friend and suffered injuries in a plane crash that should have killed him. And after he found the love of his life, he lost her to brain cancer. He has honored the memory of his wife and his best friend by the way he lives. Today's guest is more than a survivor. He's a fighter.
2, 1.
Scott Christmas, welcome to Rocket Motivation.
Thank you for having me.
Hey, Scott, let's start with where you are today. Kind of tell the listeners, where you are in your life, your family, hobbies, what do you like to do?
Let's see, I'm 51 years old, live in Fairhope, Alabama, work for Johnson & Johnson, a company called DePuy Spine division of theirs. I'm a spine hardware sales rep for Mobile, Pensacola, have been for 20 years plus. I have a beautiful little girl who's 14 years old and basically dealing with all the teenage girl drama, and that's about it, I spend most of my time exercising when I'm not taking care of her and working.
Scott, have you always been an athlete, runner, cyclist?
Yeah, in high school, played football, played soccer, always big into working out. My best friend Jeff Conrad and I, thought we were Rocky growing up, got into triathlons in 1990, so back before it was a cool thing to do. So big into cycling and running since then.
Now, I know you went to Auburn, you're Marine ROTC, and you wanted to be a pilot in the Marines, is that right?
Correct, yep.
Okay. Now, we know, I think it's in 1990 that dream got derailed because you got into a bar fight. You lost one of your eyes. Kind of tell the listeners, what happened there and what your injuries were.
Basically, it was 1990, summer of 1990. We were in a bar in West Mobile. Poor Richards, a buddy of mine, bumped into somebody, back then, 6'3", 220, 230 pounds, shaved head, solid as a rock. They always want to try out the big guy in the bar. And so, anyway, they tried me out. Bar fight ensued and got picked up a long neck, cracked it across my forehead. And when it cracked, he stuck it in my left eye and cut up and basically cut my left eye in half. And the devastation and the damage that was done to it.
When we talked earlier, you said your face looked like the Terminator when he has half his face off.
Correct. One of my best friends walked in the bathroom and I was standing there, and all he said was it looked like the Terminator when he took out his eye. I had a big piece of beer bottle sticking out of it and reached up and pulled it out and said, I need to go to the hospital. All
right, so your dreams of being a Marine pilot are gone. So, kind of take us through, what you did after that.
At age 21, when, all your aspirations and your dreams, get shattered like that, I was in and out of the hospital for a year in surgeries, to repair my face, repair my eyelid, save what they could of my eye. I still have some light vision, but the damage to the eye was, irreparable. So basically it derailed, where I was going in my life. I was trying to follow in the footsteps of my best friend, Captain Owen Duke, who was a Marine Corps aviator. And so that kind of derailed all my plans. So, basically as somebody who's, a very physical person, very passionate person, I threw myself into doing triathlons. My best friend Jeff Conrad and I just started doing them, and that kind of became my outlet. I was always a big runner, big weightlifter, and, just whatever I could to take myself forward, having lost that dream, and replace that, energy was expelled towards becoming a Marine. Now here I am lost, trying to figure out what to do with my life.
Let's fast forward 6 years after when you lost your eye. Tell us about your best friend, Win Duke.
Growing up, Win was my big brother, a couple of years older than me. His dad was one of my dad's business partners, our business partner. He was the Huck Finn. Everybody loved him. He was never met a stranger. He's the kind of guy that could jump off a 10-story building and walk away where the rest of us would be hurt. But he's just, always getting into trouble. Never met a stranger. Everybody's friend. Just a good time by all. But he had gone off to the Naval Academy and graduated in 1987 as their class president, and then went on to become a second lieutenant in the Marine Corps. And I actually moved to Annapolis after I graduated from high school in 87 and lived with his parents while I went to school trying to get into Annapolis. That didn't work out, so I ended up going to Auburn. But Wynn went on to flight school, and from there became a CH-46 helicopter pilot. So,
right. And so, I know Wynn owned his own seaplane, and you guys were out flying one day. It was just the two of you. I think you were over the Weeks Bay area, and then there was a crash, and you went down in the water. Tell us kind of what happened in the crash, and then what happened to you, and what happened to Wynn.
On July 15th, 1996, probably one of the hottest days that summer, Wynn was hopscotching across the country to his next duty station. He was going to store his plane in Seattle, then go fly King Airs for a general for 2 years. And he stopped in Mobile to see me and show me the plane and everything. And we had taken off after refueling at the old marina that was at Weeks Bay, which was the old Lulu's, the original Lulu's. And upon takeoff, we stalled out at an estimated 700 to 800 feet and rolled it over and went into 6 feet of water at an estimated 100 miles per hour plus, straight in.
Right.
He was in the front seat. I was in the back. Right before we took off, he asked me, you want to sit up front and fly us home? And I said, no, that's okay. The last time I was in the front seat of a small plane, we crashed, having crashed a plane 3 years prior myself.
Right. Wynn doesn't make it.
Correct.
Right. And you sustained just devastating injuries.
Yeah, catastrophic injuries.
Okay. Well, and before we get into those, what's going through your mind when I guess at some point you realize you guys are going to crash? What goes through your mind at that point?
Without saying it on the show, your last words are, oh, blank. I mean, we rolled over. Wynn's arms went up over his head. He said the same thing that I'm thinking, would say right now, but we're on air. We pulled back, the plane stalled out and rolled over, and right before we impacted, he put his hands up and crossed them across his forehead, bracing for impact. Everything moves in slow motion. I mean, I've been in a couple of car accidents that have been totaled, and you can pick, a blade of grass flying by you, a blade of glass, so it's just sheer terror. That's all it is.
It's interesting what you said, because although, what happened to me when I broke my neck playing football, it wasn't an act like it was the terror or scared like, you were. But when you said each blade of grass, you can notice right after I broke my neck and was paralyzed. And the only reason I'm telling this story here is because I remember looking through my face mask when I couldn't move, and I can even to this day remember each blade of grass between my helmet and my arm that couldn't move. And that's the only reason I bring that up. I know your injuries are catastrophic. Kind of tell the listeners, what all happened.
So I broke my back at L2. My spleen had ruptured, had kidney and liver damage. My foot had folded in two. My wrist had exploded. Had second-degree chemical burns over 80% of my body. Had 33 shear injuries in my brain. Those are TBIs, traumatic brain injuries, but they're shear injuries from deceleration. And so when they started operating on me at USA in my belly to remove my spleen, first-year surgical resident noticed I had a widened mediastinum, which is indicative of a heart injury. And so I had a completely transected thoracic aorta.
You're just bleeding out.
I was bleeding out through a ruptured spleen. So from my aorta, a hematoma had formed around it and held, from what I was told. So basically, they removed my spleen. The human body holds anywhere from 8 to 12 units of blood. I had over 100 units of blood transfused that night. They rolled me over, though. Some heart surgeons came in, vascular, and Peter Plush and Bill Johnson, my heroes, and rolled me over and shut down my heart for 33 minutes and put in a 2-inch graft, and the rest is kind of history.
So how many surgeries did you have?
Let's see, I had one on my belly to remove my spleen and work on my kidney and liver, and then they rolled me over, worked on my heart, and then after that, Bent Peterson, a good friend of mine, repaired my foot. So, and Dr. Hartsock. And then my wrist was closed at some point. And the rest, I had a laceration on my forehead that I don't think they stitched up. I can't remember, from hitting the back of Wynn's head. And then I was in a drug-induced coma for 2 weeks after that.
Did anybody ever tell you what your chances of survival were?
Yeah, I was given a less than 3% survival rate.
And how long were you actually in the hospital at USA?
So I was in drug-induced coma for 2 weeks in the SICU, and then moved to a hospital bed for a month after that, where I coded on the floor. And had to have an emergency chest tube put in due to a surgical error. But I survived that.
Yeah. Well, yeah. Wouldn't that have been something if you make it through all that and then you die of a surgical
Exactly. Yeah. So what they did is they removed my chest tubes without doing a procedure that they're supposed to do, and they had to come in and code me, and I was, stats were dropping and everything, and stuck a 10 blade in between my ribs and jammed their fingers all up, and I got the roadside chest tube, and I remember that one to this day.
Right. Well, tell me at discharge, the doctor that discharges you, what does he tell you?
Yeah, so my sister still to this day, she gets chills when she talks about this story. I was given a less than 3% survival rate, a less than 5% recovery rate if I did survive. And Dr. Frank Roberts, who was the number 2, Dr. Seth Eisenberg is the actual traumatologist that saved my life with Bill Johnson and Peter Plush. But Dr. Johnson came in, and man of strong faith. And as my sister says, maybe it was the early morning because that's when they round on you. Or maybe it was, the sun coming up in the background in his white coat. But he's, and I can't get up. I can't move unless somebody helps me. I'm in a brace, and, my body's just shattered. I lost 60 pounds in 2 weeks. My body metabolized and ate itself. He said, Scott, I've been practicing trauma my whole life, and never in my life have I seen somebody come through in your condition and make it. And he said, there's absolutely no medical reason that you should be here from my standpoint. He said, no medical reason at all. He said, God must have a purpose for you. I hope one day you find that purpose. And my sister still says it gives her chills every time she thinks about that.
Yeah.
So.
I can understand why. Well, what's your state of mind at this time? I would assume you're depressed. What's going on?
Pretty much numb with, here I was right before it happened, in my own mind, a physical specimen, from everything, all the hard work that I've done. I've always been prided myself on my fitness, and, magnified by more than anything, the death of my best friend. His loss was just catastrophic. And, then you've got the loss, magnify that by the loss of your own self. So part of me died in that plane as well.
All right, and let's go back to the day of the crash. Tell us about an article that you read and a poem that you read that day.
Yeah, so my story kind of takes a whole, all kinds of different twists and turns. On the day of the crash, I did not want to go for a ride with him, to be honest. Wynn was always kind of a hot dog. He was a great pilot and everything, but I'd been in a previous plane crash in 1993 with Gunner Smith when we cartwheeled his biplane on the polo fields over in Baldwin County. And I was on the front seat of the plane at that time. That day I went for a run, delaying it, didn't want to go. He was planning on me. They were all going to go to dinner afterwards. Everybody was coming down to go. And so I'd read an article, though. I'd always been a keeper of motivational articles on our bulletin board in our apartment that I share with Jeff Conrad, of, people that had amazing comebacks, the Rocky stories, and not knowing that I too would become one of those. And but it was a story about Larry Frederick, who was a LA police officer who in the late 80s had been hit by a car while out, pulling over somebody on the LA freeway, and he ended up having 110 units of blood. Just catastrophic injuries. But it was in the back of Bicycle magazine how he had learned to crawl with his child, ride a bike. He couldn't run anymore or anything, and he had ridden cross country in 1995 to raise awareness for donating blood on his own with his child, who was 15 years old. And they finished up at the White House, and everywhere they went, they had blood drives. And so I took that article out and put it on my bulletin board and said, that's going to have meaning one day. And then I also had a poem, always a collector of, soulful, inspirational poems. And there was a poem that I read that I tore out, and I'm not still to this day, don't know where it is. I found it, but put it on my bulletin board as well, and said that's going to have meaning one day. Okay.
When you get out of South after your injuries, you're told you're never going to be able to run again?
I told I would be able to run, but it probably not the same. There was no guarantees, though. I had a lot of nerve damage in my right leg, a lot of atrophy. My VMO, my quad was just shot. I never thought I would run again. So
right. Well, what did you do? So how did you start your rehab? What do you do?
Yeah, so I started my rehab out at Providence under David Field, who was actually my sister's husband's best friend, a physical therapist. And, David and I knew each other, but not real well. So I was out there and just, therapy was back then was, lift your right leg if you could. And I couldn't lift it. I couldn't lift it with it. It was dead. Pool therapy was fantastic. The pool's the best thing for you. But, I couldn't even stand up straight because the big incision in my stomach had scarred down so bad that, I remember one day David just got out some beeswax and said, we got to break up the scar tissue, and just, digging in there and just tearing it apart. But then, I hit a low point in therapy because it was lifting 5-pound weights if I could and stuff like that. And David pulled me into his office one day and said, look, what are we doing in here? And I said, we're rehabbing. And he's like, no, we're not. We're wasting each other's time. You know, look, you can sit here and I can take your money all day long and we can have a big pity party, or you can make a conscious decision to get out there and make yourself better, but it's all up to you. And that conversation right there was a big turning point for me.
Yeah, that kind of hits you right between the eyes.
Yeah, you got to have some tough love. I mean, people can do whatever they want, but it's all up to you in the end.
All right. And so what'd you do?
So I started working out hard, working out in the pool. That was the biggest thing. The pool was instrumental. I just built up a custom triathlon bike before the crash. Had never raced it, affectionately named it the Dukester. All my bikes have been named that since, but had that set up on the trainer. I was in a big old TLSO brace and, still riding the trainer inside, and eventually got on the bike with the boys out on the road, and that was a big turning point for me as well.
Right. So. And so you got to where you could ride the bike quite well.
Correct. The bike was the first thing that came back. Swimming was, that was a given because you're in the pool, but the bike was a big deal. To get back on the bike was a big turning point for me.
Running's still tough.
Running has still not even attempted it. They told me just because of the damage to my foot that, it probably wouldn't happen, but.
All right. So one day you're reading USA Today and there's a front page article. Tell me about that.
Yeah, so I worked for a good friend of mine named Mike Gates, and I was at kind of the low point in my rehab, and it was in the March of '97, maybe March, April, and I opened up USA Today, and there's a picture of Larry Frederick, the rider who I'd read about on the day of the crash, and he's in the front of USA Today, and it said, first ever 5 Points Life Ride being led across the country by Larry Frederick, and, himself and 12 other riders. And, so here I am. This article that I took out on the day of the crash is now sitting in front of me,
Right.
And so I read that, and I just knew I had to meet Larry. I mean, I was at a low point. I was riding a bunch. But just kind of, any rehabs, you hit, peaks and plateaus, and I was kind of in the valley at that point. I'd reached a point where I wasn't climbing anymore, and so my sister took it upon herself. She helped me out, and we called Life South Community Blood Centers out of Gainesville, and they said, yeah, we have guest riders come all the time. And so I took my bike and rented a car and drove up to Tuscaloosa and introduced myself, and they said, okay, come on, ride with us for a week. And it was that right there more than anything saved my life, and changed the outcome of how my rehab and everything else went.
So you meet Larry in Tuscaloosa?
In Tuscaloosa, yep.
And you start riding with them?
Start riding with them. So they had 12 riders. They all had, custom cycling kits on that said Life South Community Blood Centers. And what they were doing was they had ridden cross country, and they were coming through Alabama, and everywhere they went, they'd stop and have blood drives, predetermined blood drives. People would sign up on organ donor cards. They'd get up and tell their stories. Larry was the focal point of the ride. He was, the traumatic injury. To watch him walk across the room would make you, just hurt. He had to wear the old style airborne jumping boots that came up to your knees because the damage to his legs from the car impacting him at 70 miles per hour plus while he was writing a ticket, just catastrophic. But if you put him on a bike, he'd motor. And he is the biggest blood advocate out there for raising awareness. And so everybody else, you had somebody who had beat leukemia, somebody whose child had died at childbirth, but they'd donated the cord cell blood, or something. All these people had some kind of story behind, why they were riding and why they were selected. But Larry's injuries were the only one on there that were traumatic, from a physical impact standpoint. So he and I connected. I mean, he became my Yoda. I mean, we'd sit up at night and just talk and talk. But then along the way, we were at the Coca-Cola factory distribution plant in Montgomery, and Larry called me up and asked me to, tell my story. And I'd never been a public speaker, and said, Larry, what do I do? And he's like, just tell him your story. That's all you can do. That's all we're all doing. So, so what we were out there doing was raising awareness for donating blood, but spreading a message of hope. So.
And so that ride ended up in Gainesville, Florida?
Yeah, so that was the 97 ride, and that ended up in Gainesville, and I broke off in Atlanta and came home, but then I just, had this urge to go back. I mean, immediately that felt like they were my family. And so I called them up and asked them, if I could ride the last 2 days, and I drove down, and they said, yeah, we'll surprise them and let you come in. And they took me out and met them 2 days out, and I rode into Gainesville. And all along the ride when I was with them the week before, I was saying, can I have one of your cycling jerseys? I'd love to have one of your cycling jerseys. And they're like, no, that's only for team members, and only team members only, because they had a lot of riders that along the way that would jump in and ride with them. So when we finished up in Gainesville, they asked me to come up on stage and said, the ride was such a big success that we're going to do it again in 1998. That being said, Larry said his body needs a break. He can't, he can't do it again. But Nancy Eggert said we've had a lot of wonderful stories along the way, but one in particular has stood out more than any of the others. And she began to tell my story, and she said, with that being said, we'd like to ask Scott to come up on stage and, accept this jersey and lead us cross country. And I get choked up every single time I tell that one. And, they handed me a jersey, and the rest is kind of history.
And so you led the ride across the country the next year.
I did, yeah. In 1998, we dipped our rear wheels on the Santa Monica Pier and rode straight up to Las Vegas and across the middle part of the country, across the Hoover Dam, and back down into St. Augustine, Florida. So it was an absolutely magical experience.
And then you dipped your front wheels in the Atlantic Ocean.
Yeah, we dipped our front wheels in the Atlantic. It was absolutely incredible. And just the people you met along the way, the people that were on the ride that were fellow members. I mean, one of them is still one of my best friends, Kevin Corbett, and so it was an absolute magical experience. Well, and in a way, Wynn was doing his passion flying his plane cross country. In a way, for me, I felt like I'd completed his journey. But,
right.
So.
Well, and actually, you made some promises to yourself about doing things to honor Wynn, didn't you?
I did. So laying in the hospital, he was buried in Arlington with full military honors. That was a hard day. My brother and my dad went up to it, and obviously I was in a coma and couldn't go. But I can still remember my mom showing me the pictures from it, and that was probably the hardest day. And I knew he was gone, but just to see the actual casket and going across those hallowed grounds. But laying there, I made him a promise that I would never go pay my respects until I could run the Marine Corps Marathon, which finishes at the Marine Corps Memorial, and then walk over and lay my finisher medal. I wouldn't do that until I could do that. And so,
and you did it.
I did it. I did that in 2003. I planned on doing it. And my second promise was that I'd do all the races that I'd done the year before. And my other promise was I would never go to Hawaii until I could do the Ironman there, and then take my lay and take it to Arlington and lay it there as well. But I did that in 2003, the Marine Corps Marathon, and again on the 20th anniversary. So.
Right. Well, tell us about the Marine Corps Marathon ends. You did it.
Yep.
And so now you're in Arlington Cemetery. All right. And now tell us about that story.
Yeah. So there's a couple of different things that happened on that day. So I had a jersey that was painted on the back. I'd written on the back in loving memory of Captain Owen Duke. And it, the day of the plane crash and everything. And about 3 miles in, I was running with a couple of buddies. A staff sergeant came up and tapped me on the back and said, "How'd you know Captain Duke?" And I told him, and he said, "Well, I was his crew chief." So we ran together for a mile. So that was a pretty powerful story. But then at the end, my friends asked me if they wanted me to go over to Arlington with me. I said, "No, I need to do this on my own." So I walked over and. I thought I'd know exactly where to go. I knew he was in Section 6 near the Tomb of the Unknown Soldier, but never been to Arlington before. And walked in there just in a wreck of a shape from having just the worst race ever. And I'm limping around, and it's got about an hour to go before they close down. And I knew there's no way I could make it all the way back down to the visitor center and get them to give me the correct spot. So I just, after walking around in that section forever, I stopped, panicked, and raised my arms, looked towards the heavens and said, "Where are you?" And right then, a gentle breeze came over the hill, and it was like somebody was touching me on my shoulder and said, turn around, and there it was, this beautiful, unique headstone that I'd walked past probably 1,000 times, and it was less than 10 feet from me. I was directly in front of it, and it was a beautiful experience, if those things can be such, an experience, so spent the last hour there.
That part of the story is amazing. And I mean, here's the thing, just listening to the story so far, that would be a show in itself. But I mean, now we've almost got part 2 of this show coming. I mean, let's just tell it. All right. So later on, you meet your wife, Amy.
Correct.
Ironically, she's an ophthalmologist.
Yeah.
Okay. How did you get it to where you really met her?
I'm a single dad at this point. I've got Kaylee, who's real little, and she's probably 2. And I'm up at the Grand Hotel pool, and I see this girl up, and just gorgeous. And so I was like, holy cow, who is that? And then, we'd probably crossed paths 1,000 times. But once I noticed her, it seemed like I saw her every two seconds, throughout Fairhope in our little town. And I'd always wave and smile at her, and she'd just seemed looking at me. She was stoic. She was like, who's this goofball checking me out? But then I asked somebody about her, and they told me who she was and that she was an ophthalmologist. And I was actually on a ride with her senior partner, Sandy Hupp. And I told him I'd met her, and because I walked across and introduced myself to her at the polo fields at Polo at the Point And he said, well, yeah, you need to come in for a follow-up. You haven't been in for a follow-up on your eye for a long time. And I was like, so he set me up a couple of appointments, or an appointment with her. And I had to bail several times because of surgery. And she was just about the point where she was going to, ban me from ever coming in. And I went in there and sat down with this big plan that, tell her about my left eye, and there's nothing you can do with my left eye. My whole plan was to ask her out on a date. And so she came bebopping in and sat down and introduced herself. And I told her, she said, what can I do for you? And she was all frustrated. And I said, what's going on? She said, well, the patient right before you had his daughter ask me out on a date. And I was like, okay, I need to go to plan B. So and told her about my left eye, which she thought it was kind of cool and funky. And anyway, so the rest is kind of history. We ended up eventually, asking her out on a date or to go running. And then we went out on the date, and it was perfect. We were a perfect fit for each other.
You guys get married?
We got married in 2011, October.
And how was your marriage to her? Was your marriage perfect?
Our marriage was absolutely perfect. Yeah, we were perfect for each other. Amy was more quiet. I'm more of a talk to everybody. And then once you broke through her shell, it took her a little while, but once you got through it, she was as bubbly and friendly as they came. And we were just a good fit. She was a big time runner. Eventually got into triathlon. She was a natural at anything she did. Just could go for days and days and days, and just an amazing athlete, amazing person.
Well, and I know at some point she begins to have some vision problems, and I know you guys go get some tests, some MRIs, CTs, and I guess you discover she has a tumor in her brain.
In 2015, she started having double vision and downward left gaze, which is typically what happens when you have a fourth nerve palsy, and it's something I've learned now that I never would have known, except being married to Amy, that it's you hit your head as a child and you have some damage, but your muscles overcompensate for that damage until you get older, and then they get weaker, and then you have double vision. That's correctable. Muscle weakness is correctable by an ophthalmologist, pediatric ophthalmologist. Her senior partner, to take the whole story together, Leonard Rich, Sandy Help was her other partner. Leonard Rich was the one that operated on my eye, one of my third surgeries. He was her old partner. So she had this downward left gaze, double vision, and eventually she went to Leonard in December of 2015, and he said, yeah, you've got, you need to have muscle realignment, but I always do an MRI, just to double check, not that we're going to find anything. And we discovered that she had what they thought was a big lesion on her left brain. It didn't enhance. It didn't look like a tumor. It was very diffuse. Everybody thought it was an atypical MS lesion. So in January of 2016, we started chasing it over to Ochsner with an MS specialist when it just didn't have the characteristics of an MS, but nobody thought it was a tumor. I mean, we chased it for, serial scans for every 4 weeks. So you had the plateau of, we're doing the scan, and then you came off of that and high, and nothing had changed, no symptoms. It advanced, and then you've got to wait for 3 weeks where you tried to make life normal again before you went back and did it all over again. It was just constant, and I was in communication with every neurosurgeon I could find in the country that was a specialist. I work with a lot of them in spine, and so I have a lot of connections, and Amy does too, being a surgeon. So we were talking to Dr. Friedman and Duke, where we ended up with Burt Neighbors at UAB. At the time, we were in New Orleans, traveling all over the country to see people, and over there every 4 weeks. And in October of 2016, the decision was made to biopsy it, and it came back as a grade 2 diffused astrocytoma.
Which means what?
A lot of tumors are encapsulated in the brain, and have their own little pocket. This was snaked through all the good tissue. So very hard to dissect. A grade 2, the gold standard is to watch and wait unless signs and symptoms change. You and I could have one and never know it and live our whole life. Hers, the gold standard is to watch and wait, and hers had not changed. So about 3 weeks before her 6-month follow-up, she had a grand mal seizure April 4th, and the ensuing scan showed that it had doubled in size and crossed midline. Textbooks will tell you a tumor that crosses midline is a GBM, glioblastoma, multiform, and so we were in the fight of our life then, we knew. And so we went to MD Anderson, talked to them. We ended up at UAB with Burt Neighbors, and everybody said you're in the best care with Dr. Burt Neighbors up there. Even MD Anderson said that. And so we started, heavy chemo and radiation in the summer of 2017.
You do everything you can, but she doesn't make it.
Yeah, we did it. I mean, I wouldn't wish it on my worst enemy. Amy was an absolute, just rock through it all. Still ran every day, and that's where we'd spend our afternoons, out in the park afterwards. Had all the classic weight gain from steroids, the hair loss. Eventually, once we brought her home, she was having breakthrough seizures daily. She essentially lost the function of her right side, and we took her to her primary care, and her body was just saturated with PE, so much so that they were surprised she even made it there. Took her to the hospital, and the decision was made to bring her home, and she was on hospice for about 2 weeks. And then, God called her home on September 24th.
Well, and then let's go back again to the day of the crash with your best friend, Wynn. We've already kind of linked up how that article that you read with Larry. On that same day, though, you read and tore out that poem.
Yep.
All right, tell us about that.
So the Wynn's dad sent me a picture of Wynn walking into the surf in Hawaii, and that's where kind of he envisions his, Wynn surfing the great waves in heaven for the rest of his life. And his sister Betsy, who I'm still very, very close with, took the poem and put it on up in the clouds on his picture. And it's a very, very powerful poem. And I gave Amy's eulogy, and at the end I had everybody close their eyes and I read her eulogy. And then it sits on an angel in Point Clear Cemetery, the old historic cemetery where she's, was laid to rest beneath the angel. And it's one of those you'd have to, see it and experience it and read it to yourself.
And what have you done to honor Amy? I know I think there's a scholarship at the University of Texas at Houston where she went to school.
While she was on hospice, her sister and I, Amy and her sister always ran the Houston Marathon, and I started running it too. With her sister, and so we kind of do that every year. Of course, this year COVID's messed all that up, but then one of her old classmates, who actually Luke Harper, who married Amy's best childhood friend Molly Harper, called me up one day and said he wanted to start a scholarship at the med school, UT McGovern School of Medicine in Houston, where she went. And so we took it, and he said, I'd like you to take this and run with it. And I took it and ran with it. And with J&J, I'm lucky that, anything I donate, it's 2-for-1, match. So it's, I can escalate that thing real quick, but it's the fastest ever endowed scholarship in the history of UT, service students for years to come. So, Amy's still giving back and helping others, heal others.
Let's kind of get into it now. Scott, how have you been able to handle all this adversity that you've been through in your life?
I get asked that question a lot. We're all given gifts. God's gift to me was resiliency and toughness. My life story truly is a Forrest Gump story. I came home after one event when Amy was battling her tumor. We didn't think it was this advanced at the time, and told her something that had happened, and she goes, please, and somebody that was listening said, God, you really are Forrest Gump. And she said, please don't say that. And I said, why? And she said, because Jenny dies in the movie, and, here we are. I'd like to think I'm not an idiot savant. God, I think, that was a gift given to me, and I'm a happy person, I think. I was thinking about it before, on my long run before I came over here. I'm a very happy and positive person. Hope is my favorite word in the world. Amy was very pragmatic. She knew that this was going to get her, and I was the one on the Titanic saying, hey, we got this. We're going to make it. We're going for a long swim. It's going to be real cold. But I think she knew. Myself, though, I'm always hopeful. I think each thing that's happened to me has prepared me for the next. I think when Dr. Roberts said, I hope you find the purpose, God's purpose for you. And myself, I firmly believe this. I think it was to help Amy through her own life and death battle, and help her get through it, and her to make it to the finish line. And, I think now she's helping me make it to my finish line. Knowing that she's out there waiting on me. There's not a day that goes by that I don't think about her and think about seeing her again.
If there are, people out there that are listening that are going through some tough times, what advice would you give them to get over what they're experiencing?
The sun's going to rise again. It is going to rise again. God's plan, no matter what it is, it's God's plan, and there's a reason it's happening. You may not like it now, and we may not know until the very end. But for myself, you're going to have, find the people that are positive in your life. There's going to be angels that come into your life that, you don't realize what their purpose was until much later on. Larry Frederick was one of mine. Very lucky that I have two very loving, supporting parents, and, and a sister and brother, and, have just a plethora of good friends, but I've always been a big Rocky fan, right? The underdog. I mean, I love what he said. It's not about how hard you can hit. It's about how hard you can get hit and keep moving forward. That's how you get through adversity. You've got to take the hits. I mean, you can't wish them away. I mean, you yourself, I mean, you're living proof of it. I mean, this is the hand we've been dealt. I mean, I'm not going to like it. I'm not going to say that the dark days don't show up, because I've seen some dark days. I mean, I've also seen some things happen that, can only be heavenly sent. So there's no reason I'm supposed to be here. I was here to meet Amy, and, somebody could look at it and say how cruel that you survive all that and you meet the love of your life. Then she dies, but, God, I wouldn't change it for anything in the world. I mean, I didn't get to fly for the Marine Corps because I lost my eye. Well, if I'd flown for the Marine Corps, I might not have been in a plane with Win, and, I would have, anybody else in there might not have been able to get down to him and, say our goodbyes. And, when I was there with him when he took his last breath, and he was my brother and I loved him and, still do. And I was there when my wife, took her last breath, and I'm grateful for that.
Scott, your story's been incredible, and I'm so glad you came in here today to tell it. I know the listeners are going to get so much out of this. You post a lot of your stories and thoughts you have on your social media that I've read and I think are fantastic and very inspiring and motivational. If some of the listeners want to follow you and read some of your stuff, where can they do it?
Scott Christmas, on Facebook, on Instagram, I post stuff on there, but you can't write as much, and I'm a writer and a storyteller, so Facebook's more my avenue.
Well, then you're certainly not doing much on Twitter, since it's restricted to so many characters.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, Twitter I just totally avoid. So,
I got you. Well, tell us about the book you're writing. I assume it's got a lot more detail about what we've talked about, but tell us a little bit about it.
Yeah, so I started writing a long time ago after my plane crash, all the things that I'd done and had experienced since then. And then, clearly with Amy, that takes it in a whole different direction. The title is A Place Called Hope, and there's a lot of meanings behind that. It may change towards the end, but that's been the title since, ever since Wynn passed away in the plane crash.
Well, and the way I kind of started this out when I introduced you, you've got all this adversity of your own, and then though the way you've honored your best friend Wynn and your wife Amy has just been spectacular. It's like, that's your meaning of your life. Your calling has been to not only deal with what you've got to deal with, but to honor them.
Yeah. After Wynn passed away, on the back of all my cycling jerseys or running jerseys, my email even is "Great Day to Be Alive," and that's always been one of my sayings. But then my other that Amy gave me that I'd always said, but then she found it and had it done for me, is "Within the journey lies the reward." And I think we all get caught up on the end result, but along the way, if you look back, and maybe it's when you get older and wiser, it's along the way. That's where within the journey lies the reward.
Right. Well, Scott, thanks so much for coming in.
Man, I appreciate you asking me, Rod.
All right, this not only wraps up this episode, but this wraps up season 1 of Rocket Motivation, which was the inaugural season. Scott was a great guest to end the season on. We're going to take a short break and launch season 2 in about a month. Let everybody catch up on the episodes they've missed. Thanks for hanging with us, and thanks for listening. If you're interested in getting my book, Get Back Up, just go to Amazon and put in Get Back Up and my name, Rod Caden. It'll pop right up. I would love it if you would subscribe to the podcast and rate and review the show wherever you listen to your podcasts. I would really appreciate it if you'd share it with a friend. I would like as many people to hear my message as possible. Never give up and always get back up.